ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. You introduced me as Member of Parliament from Austria. Yes, I'm from Austria, but member of the European Parliament. And in European Parliament, we are allowed to have 1-minute speeches, and that's all. So, be sure I will use every minute here from my 20-minute amount. This for our timekeeper. When I got up in the morning at 4 o'clock, due to my jet lag, it took me 15 minutes to hold that speech. So we have 5 minutes for jokes or personal amendments from my side. I had to change the beginning of my speech totally within the last 20 minutes because, Karen, I didn't know where you brought me. Yeah, really. During the last break, my assistant got a phone call from Austria, from the Secretary General of my party, asking her what I'm doing here. Because an Austrian newspaper called my party secretariat why I'm speaking at a conference of the Global Freedom Movement, a very well-known hate group. Yeah, really. So, my assistant Verena and my former assistant Elizabeth, who will stand here in the afternoon, were just preparing a press statement to explain what I'm doing here, and I can tell you I will do my best to make better people out of you all. So. And you know, I already did my best 2 years ago. I don't know if you know it, but now I can tell you. It was me who made sure that Donald Trump is your president now. Yeah. I was election observer in Florida from OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and I was in Florida to observe the election, and you know, Florida always was a swing state, and when I was there, it was sure that Trump won the election. So, I believe now I'm in my speech. Yeah. At the beginning, we had a phone call some days ago, and the original headline of that session was not national sovereignty, but nationalism. And when an Austrian and European hears nationalism, ooh, that's a word, that's very weird word. I said, oh, please, Karen, don't use that word, nationalism, that's bad, and it's like Nazism, and you shouldn't do that, and because why? We know that leftists always try to change our language. But when you go on Google and open Wikipedia and type in nationalism, what do you get? You get a definition, and I don't think that's a bad definition. Wikipedia says nationalism has 2 expressions. The one is the inclusive nationalism, or as we say, patriotism. That's good. We need that for nation building, and that's what we refer. We refer positively to our own people. But the second expression of nationalism is not inclusive, but exclusive nationalism. Chauvinism, as we say in German-speaking countries or most parts of Europe. You would better know the word supremacy, or even worse, white supremacy or something like that. Huh? This is degradation of other people. That's what we don't need. That's what we don't do. We have a positive patriotism. And this is, for the beginning, I believe, a very, very important definition. And again, before I turn at the subject at hand, I would like to say a few words about the European party system, and in particular, of course, the Austrian party system. What do you think when you hear Austria? Please don't say kangaroos. Austria is what? Austria, that little country in the heart of Europe, you know, Vienna, capital. We brought Schwarzenegger to you. That's Austria. Just to explain. Yeah, I know. It's, yeah. But when he started it, he was okay, but then he turned. And that's a typical Austrian, that's why I mentioned him. And that's a typical Austrian thing. You surely heard about our Chancellor Kurz. Yeah, he was very positively connotated, but I will explain to you what he's really like. But first, back to the Austrian party system. And the party landscape in whole Europe is totally different from that in the United States. In Austria, as in the whole of Europe, social democratic parties on the left and Christian democratic parties on the right were dominant in the decades following the Second World War. It must be stressed, however, that the Christian democratic parties cannot be compared to the US Republicans. Many of you would have thought so, but it isn't. Rather, one could compare the social democrats, socialists, and the Christian democrats with the left and the right wing of your US Democrats. That's a very important point that Americans have to learn. Especially since the 1980s, most Christian Democrats have been shifting more and more to the left. The dominance of the Social Democrats and Christian Democrats was particularly overwhelming in Austria until the 90s. Every state job, from high civil servant to small teacher, was and is awarded according to party affiliation. When you think of Austria, you have to think everything twice. We have everything twice. We have, you know, your automobile association, AAA, AAA, American. Austria has two. We are 8.5 million inhabitant country, like New York or double LA. But we have two automobile organizations, one from the Christian Democratic Party, one from the Socialist Party. We say one black and one red. Hospitals. When hospitals are within the city, it's most times red hospitals, socialist-led. When they are in the countryside, smaller towns, smaller cities, they are black. You can only have a career there when you are member of the right party. What do I have? Yeah, sports organization. We have sports organizations. You think normally the field that is not connected to politics at all. Not in Austria. We have black, Christian Democrat, and red, socialist, social democrat, sports organization. From lowest level to the federal level. And on the federal level, there are two main associations, a black one and a red one, and since the 70s, a third one, the independent one. That's Austria. So those two parties have come into our lives, into everywhere of our lives. And this is what you always have to imagine when you're thinking about Austria. In addition to these two parties, my party, Freedom Party, FPÖ, has existed since 1956 as a union of liberal patriots. In this context, again, be careful, liberal. The adjective liberal refers to economic policy. It cannot be compared with your liberals in the US who are more orientated towards social democracy. In this sense, the FPÖ, Freedom Party, describes itself as national liberal. National refers to standing up for one's own people, the patriotic party we call ourselves, without degrading other peoples and cultures. As in the rest of Western Europe, the 80s were marked by an ever-increasing influx of immigrants, especially from Turkey, which was beginning to change the cities in particular. It was during this period that the FPÖ rise under Jörg Haider, a name you may have heard, a name relative of mine, began. In addition to the struggle against the superiority of the SPÖ and ÖVP, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, the increasing alienation is an important issue. First, disappointing conservative voters from Christian, People's Party, from the Christian Democratic People's Party, turned to Freedom Party. Then it was mainly workers in the 90s. Today, Freedom Party is still the largest workers' party in Austria. The FPÖ campaign, Austria First, from 1992, now you know where your campaign or Trump's campaign came from originally, another contribution of Austrian politics. We did it. So this campaign, which criticized and sought to push back against further immigration, marked the first major turning point. For the first time, the Freedom Party was confronted with the broad front of opponents. All other parties, from the neo-Marxist Greens to the People's Party, Christian Democrats, various other organizations, from left-wing trade unions to Catholic groups even, as well as almost all media on the country, mobilized against the campaign Austria First. Trade unions sent their followers from all over Austria to demonstrations to Vienna. Teachers sent their students, and so on. And those 1990 years showed two developments. The further influx of immigrants, including more and more Muslims, was increasing. FPÖ increased too in strength. Freedom Party under Jörg Haider attracted a lot of international attention, and as the first successful patriotic right-wing party in Europe, Freedom Party thus became a model of what is nowadays called right-wing populism. As well, we became bogeyman for all the leftists, but also a role model for people on the right. In 1999, Freedom Party became the second strongest party and formed the government with the Christian Democratic Party in the year 2000. What followed can be viewed as a mixture of tragedy and comedy. While the government was sworn in, the left-wing mob raged in the streets of Vienna. The federal president, the Christian Democrat, a decided opponent of Freedom Party, showed an iron face at the swearing-in, and the other EU member states, and now it comes, imposed sanctions against that new democratically elected government. Imagine that. Sanctions against a government that is formed out of two democratically elected parties. That's Austria, that's Europe. The president of the EU Council at that time was the socialist Antonio Guterres. You know the name Antonio Guterres? You know what he's now? I will come to him later, yeah? Secretary General of the United Nations. After less than a year, these sanctions were lifted again. The first attempt to overthrow the participation of a patriotic party in the government from the outside has failed. These sanctions have, however, revealed a broad network that is prepared to fight against patriotic movements by all means. In addition to political parties, this network consists of most of the major media in Europe, as well as the so-called civil society groups, such as trade unions, church groups, and many more. Over the next few years, Freedom Party had to contend primarily with internal problems. It was a weird time. This led to decline and division by 2006. Party leader Jörg Haider left the Freedom Party, and Mr. Strache, Heinz-Christian Strache, who had to resign in May, became new chairman in 2006. In the new millennium, the problem of immigrants became also increasingly virulent. Just a few words to this topic. In Austria, there are four larger groups of immigrants. There are EU citizens, especially Germans, immigrants from Eastern Europe who came to Austria after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and third, immigrants from the Balkans who have come to Austria since the 60s for work. And all those three groups make no problems. They work hard, they pay the taxes, and they are largely integrated. The problems are made by the fourth group, and this is immigrants from Islamic countries, especially Turkey, and more recently from North Africa and the Middle East. The majority of these immigrants practice a strict, as we heard today, a strict conservative Islam. Integration does not take place. We have people in Austria for more than 20, 25 years who don't speak a single word German because they don't need. They have their own societies, their own shops, everything. It can be observed that Muslims already born in Austria hold even more extreme views than their parents. Chechen and Afghan refugees have proved to be particularly dangerous. The close connection between Muslims in Austria and abroad, especially Turkey and Saudi Arabia, is particularly problematic in this context. There are close links to Muslim organizations and mosque associations via the Turkish Ministry of Religion. In 2014, it became apparent just how many supporters President Erdogan has among the Turks in Austria. In Austria's largest ice rink, tens of thousands of fanatical fans cheered to their sultan. Erdogan explained in his speech where the journey is to go. We are all grandsons of Sultan Süleyman and Kara Mustafa. Sultan Süleyman and Kara Mustafa, you know, Sultan Süleyman was the one, the leader of the first Turkish siege in 1529, and Kara Mustafa, the leader of the second Turkish siege in 1683, when they nearly conquered Austria and Vienna, and it was, where's the Polish colleague? Yeah? And it was the Polish king Jan Sobieski in 1683 who saved not only Austria, but the European culture for us. In Austrian politics, Muslims are overly represented in Vienna. Due to their growing electorate, Muslims are of interest, of course, for both the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. For the Social Democrats, Mr. Omar al-Rabi, originally from Iraq, sits on the Vienna Municipal Council. He has good contacts to the Muslim Brotherhood. Islamist contacts of the Christian Democrats are mostly Christian Democrats, Islamic, okay. Mostly established through the Wirtschaftsbund. This is a sub-organization of the Conservative Party for business people, for entrepreneurs. It is therefore not surprising that People's Party leader, Mr. Kurz, Sebastian Kurz, said in 2015, Islam, of course, belongs to Austria. The migration crisis in 2015 was a decisive event for all of Europe. The Austrian federal government, consisting of the Socialists and the Conservative Party, in 2015 opened the borders completely at that time, and border controls no longer took place. Chancellor and ministers celebrated their own humanitarian gesture at that time. The Austrian population, on the other hand, was not at all enthusiastic. What the Austrians experienced afterwards was a pure horror scenario, uncontrolled migrant groups covered above all in eastern and southeastern Austria. Theft and robbery, rape and violence flood the country. Almost 200,000 migrants from the Middle East and North Africa remained in Austria. Austria is a country of 8.5 million inhabitants, like New York, yeah? Double LA, I already said that. In the meantime, Freedom Party has regained its strength and won every election. In this climate, the Christian Democratic Party seemingly shifted to the right, where the voters are, always, and suddenly turned against mass immigration. The big election winners of 2017 were FPÖ, Freedom Party, and People's Party, Christian Democrats, both of which were critical of immigration. It was only logical that they should form a government. This showed that Europe has also changed. There were no sanctions this time, others than 15 years before. Mr. Herbert Kickl from Freedom Party became Minister of the Interior, who in Austria is responsible for the police, but also for border protection and migration. We need that name afterwards. After 1 year of really successful work by the government, the first problems emerged, and they emerged because of that global compact on migration. Mr. Jongen already mentioned. I was foreign policy speaker of my party at that time last year, and I very well remember the struggle with Christian Democratic Party, because Christian Democratic Party wanted to approve that migration pact, and we strictly rejected this pact, and we made it. Austria was one of the first, besides the US of course, one of the first Western countries who rejected that compact on migration, and we started thus a domino effect. 13 other European countries then followed. And I know it was a hard fight with our own foreign minister, who was brought into her office by my own party. But yeah, okay. I like the time. I like the time. Yeah, and by the way, yeah, 1 minute, I know. But by the way, you remember that Mr. Soros, you know that name? Yeah, Open Society Foundation, had to leave Hungary with his Open Society university. You know where he is now with that university? Who first raised his hand to invite him to come? It was Mr. Kurz, who invited him to Austria, and that university now is in Vienna. So much about Mr. Kurz. Yeah, he's not that messiah, because I realized some right-wing people in America think, oh, that poor center-right Austrian chancellor was put away from his office by the leftists. No, 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 no. He is not center-right. And it was us who voted him out of his office. With the help of the Social Democrats, but why not? So, come to an end. I have to come to an end. In May this year, the scandal surrounding the so-called Ibiza video took place. Yeah, what happened? A video published by the Süddeutsche Zeitung, a non-Austrian, a German newspaper, very left, showed Vice Chancellor Strache from Freedom Party talking to a supposed Russian woman in Ibiza. It is only a short 7-minute excerpt. The whole video, more than 6 hours, is still not published. Strache and the woman discussed the purchase of Austria's largest newspapers and the possible award of public contracts. Chancellor Kurz demanded Strache's resignation as a condition for the continuation of the coalition, and Strache resigned. But then the People's Party, Christian Democrats, demanded the resignation of Interior Minister Kickl too. He was the most successful Minister of the Interior. In Austria, we say the best since World War II. Yeah? But Freedom Party did not give in to this blackmail, and the People's Party announced the breakup of the coalition. Immediately after the end of that coalition, the caretaker government begins to reverse important laws and regulations in the field of asylum and migration, first under Chancellor Kurz, and then under his her successor, Mrs. Bierlein. After the elections on 29th of September, last Sunday, a government consisting of the Christian Democratic People's Party and the Greens will be formed, I can tell you. They have already started negotiations, and I'm sure Christian Democrats will have that communists in their government. Overall, come to an end. This affair raises a number of unanswered questions. First, who were the people behind the trap in Ibiza? In view of the enormous financial costs involved, the involvement of one or more secret services seems obvious. Two, why did a German newspaper publish this shortened video just before an election? Three, when did Chancellor Kurz know about the video? There is evidence that Kurz knew about the video at least 1 year before its release. And four, why was the coalition blown up contrary to initial promises by the Christian Democratic Party? So what lessons can we learn from this affair? 5 lessons, then you made it. First, it is possible to overthrow an inconvenient government from outside of Austria. 2, this is only possible if one of the two coalition partners does not abide by agreements. 3, the People's Party, Christian Democrats, representing the European Christian democracy, is not a reliable partner. First pro-integration, then anti-immigration, then pro-immigration. Again, it's like slalom skiing. This is what Austrians always can do very well. 4, the firm cohesion of the Freedom Party has prevented a larger disaster. We saved 16% after that normally lethal attempt to kill our party. And 5, the opponent, whoever that is ready to use all means to manipulate governments and elections. And my friends, it's up to us to prevent that.